My name is Roderick Dewar, generally known as Rod Dewar. I was born in Oakland, California. And that was in 1929, August 28, 1929. My mother was born in Denmark. They moved to the United States and to Oakland in 1905. My mother was about 4 years old at the time, and they lived in Oakland most of their natural lives. My mother had one sister at the time. There was one sister that was born here. They had absolutely no money. My grandfather failed in Denmark, and as a result of failing, he thought that the streets of America would pay with gold, and he would do very well here. Well, he didn't, and they were in They were in New York, and then they found out the streets were not paved with gold there either, and they thought they were in San Francisco, so they went there, and they had no money, and my grandmother had these large metal pots, and she did the laundry as they went from place to place. They got across the country, and anyway, they lived from there. They actually got a divorce, and then lived in Oakland. My father is of Scottish heritage, third generation. They were in Canada first, then they were in Northern California in Lake County, Middletown, and then they were in Oakland. My mother and father met. My father was in the title company business, and my mother was secretary. As far as education is concerned, my mother only went through grammar school, and my father went 1 year to college. That was UC Berkeley. This is a joke, but I left Oakland when I was 11 months of age, and my parents followed me, you know. So we moved to Salinas. As I said, my father was in the title business, and he worked for Oakland Title, and he was transferred to the manager of the Salinas branch. That's how we got to Salinas. In Salinas, he figured out that it would be a good idea to start his own title company, and most of the title companies were in, 3 title companies were in Salinas. He figured he would start one in Monterey, and that's what he did. And when he was in Monterey, we lived in Carmel. We lived on First and Dolores Street in Carmel. That would be the northwest corner. And at that particular time, it was pretty woodsy. Actually, the Robert Louis Stevenson School, grammar school, surrounds it now, and that one house is there. But we had the corner house. And we were on a block that was the longest block in Carmel. It wandered for what would be equivalent to 6 or 7 blocks, and we were one of the 2 houses on that block. And of course, it's been built up since. We weren't so poor that we were without food, and my parents kept me happy. And I had, you know, so far as I knew, my daddy went to the office and worked. And mother stayed home. But she started working for my father when he first started his company, because he couldn't afford a secretary. When my father had the title company, started the title company, and my mother worked there, there was a little house in back of our house, and that was occupied by a sort of a maid, and she was an American Indian, and it couldn't have been better. She taught us what plants you could eat that were in the woods along the seashore. We cracked open sea anemones, took out the ovaries and squeezed lemon on them and ate them. We went clamming at Moss Landing, where everybody raked for clams, but Mary said, dig here. Oh, she taught me also how to play checkers. She taught me how to play chess, and she also taught me how to play the ocarina. She cared a great deal for us. And she was, and for my friends. When Frank Timmons broke his arm sliding down the banister, she was the one who splintered it. She was capable of doing a lot of things that our parents didn't do. Sort of mysterious things to everybody else, but not to us, because she taught us that was a different world. When I was younger, we got up early in the morning and took our bicycles and rode around town. As I said, when we lived on First and Dolores Street, we ran around in the woods, and I had a perpetual case of poison oak. Oh God, it was awful. But anyway, that was the case. And they had what was called calamine lotion, which was pink and sticky and messy, and sometimes it was so bad that my eyes were swollen shut. But anyway, we still did it. That was area. In back of Mary's shack was a large clump of bamboo, and we built a fort there and finally tramped it down. I went by there 2 years ago, and there was just a little bit of that bamboo still left. Of course, we played athletics. I was always involved with athletics. We actually, Sunset Grammar School had a basketball court, and which was unusual for such a little school. It was not full size, but there it was. And swam, of course, rode the waves down at the beach. We were impervious to cold at that time. I collected stamps. At that time, they weren't printing as many stamps, and all the stamps, U.S. stamps, were of one color. I was quite a collector of those. There was a summer reading program at the library, and the children's section was, as you enter the library, you go to the left and up the steps. And there's administration up there now, but that was the children's section. Read a lot of books, the Oz series and others. The environment did impact my childhood, because we ran in the woods. As I said, we got poison oak. We climbed trees. We ran on the beach. We body surfed in the water. We were fond of hiking. We utilized the natural resources in a very, very happy, entertaining way. And everybody lived in Oakland. My parents met there because both sets of parents were there, and they remained until they passed away. That time, one had to go through San Jose, right through the middle of town. And there were about 40,000, 50,000 people. It's somewhat different today. And then Bayshore was developed. And then we went by Moffett Field, where the Akron, either the Akron or the other dirigible were there, and I could see them on a piling up 100 feet or something like this. This is the way they anchored them. Never seen that. And of course, I didn't drive. That was my parents. They came down frequently to see us. And when we did, Pappy and I went fishing on a hook and line boat, in Monterey Bay. These commercial boats. And the surprising thing was the bay was filled with fish. We would probably catch as many as 50 perch, big gunny sack of them. And then on the wharf, they had a lot of Japanese who gutted the fish and flattened it out and all that. And then I took the fish home. And my mother would see 50 fish and go, "Oh my God." And it wasn't. Somehow or another, only 2 or 3 got cooked. I don't know what happened to the rest. But anyway, grandfather, and on those boats, they sit out there and rock a bit. And a lot of people got sick. And I never did, and neither did grandfather, but it was not a better sight, I went to Sunset Grammar School, which is now Sunset Center. And the first grade, you worked up toward Ocean Avenue. You started on 10th, and there was a lower element to that, and that was where the first grade was. Also on that level and a little bit below that, almost on Mission Street, was the shop. That is where we had woodworking. And our playground exercise consisted of marbles. And we also had a game called milk tops, because at that time, milk was in a carton with a top on it. And so the tops would get dry, and you would slap one down, and then somebody else would slap one, and if they covered it in any sense, they got it. That was the game. And there was a tree there on that lower level that's no longer there. We all climbed it. The teachers were furious. But that was the first grade type of thing. You want me to go on with other? Then the next level was, that would be 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. They were in what we call the middle playground. That's the same level as the entrance to the auditorium there, and that was the playground. And then finally, the 7th grade was near where the parking lot is, just above the parking lot. One is the community center, and the other is the administration building. Those were the 2 7th grades. As far as the 8th grade was concerned, we moved to the high school. Mind you, we all had to take shop, because Carmel was an artist community, but there were more artisans than there were painters. Ironworking, furniture makers, that kind of work. And so we were all required to take shop. I was terrible. The project that everybody was required to do was to make a kite, because at that particular time, the high-rise property across the highway from the high school, from the high school, Hatton Road, Mesa, and all of that was bare. And in March, there would be wind, and they had a kite festival, a big event. That was the real big event. Now, I was terrible, because what happened is my kite was too heavy. My parents had absolutely no mechanical skills, so they couldn't help me. And I could remember little Roddy running along the grass with the kite dragging behind me and bouncing on the ground. we did have some sports. They were organized in the sense that there were no actual, there were no spectators, but we did play baseball. We played basketball because of the basketball court. And we also had a little boxing in the 7th grade. So far as the grades are concerned, the 8th grade was was Carmel High. And the school had been built 4 years before. And some of the greater amenities were in by the time we got there. There was a track, football stadium. There were cement bleachers, and they had the present rather large basketball pavilion. And so the school was there. And so when we came, it was a tidy little school, small, because what happened is those who lived in the Carmel Valley and those who lived down the coast were bused by us to Monterey. And our school district was small at the time. It's expanded, and consequently the high school was expanded, but ours was small. And the 8th grade, of course, was interesting. There were not, spectator athletics for 8th graders, but we did a lot of watching of them. And I'll give you a diversionary story that I'm not sure you want in it, but anyway, I'll give it to you. So we're 8th graders, and there are these senior cheerleaders. And they were beautiful in our opinion. Oh, they were lovely looking girls. And we sat down in the bottom row, so when they swirled around, we could see their red pants, And so, anyway, there was a Sadie Hawkins dance. And the senior girls invited Mike, Owen, and myself to the senior prom. They dumped us pretty early on, but except for some chiding, there was not much relationship between the upper class and ourselves. When I became a freshman, then it was all sports. I played football, and I was taller and heavier than I am now, but not very heavy because you didn't have to be in the 40s. If you were 170-pound lineman, you were big. Well, I was about that, and I achieved some prominence in football. I was all league, type different things. I swam competitively. I was a lifeguard, and didn't play. And I played pretty good basketball, but I was too short to really succeed. Couldn't hit a ball. I always sprained my fingers when I tried to catch it. So that game was out. But I did play a lot of football. In high school, I associated mostly with those who were on athletic teams. That was sort of the common denominator. As far as outstanding teachers in Carmel, from my perspective, in the high school, I would say that, again, I like most of them. One or two were disasters, but the rest were teachers that I enjoyed. What was interesting, too, was some of the teachers had a novel approach. And also, basically, as far as the scholastic level of the students was concerned, was very high. For instance, when I went to Stanford, of our class of 40, 5 of us went there. But anyway, there was an interesting approach by some of the teachers. I recall one of them would take us all out in the woods to teach. Not well, just sort of off campus, but not indeed in deep in the woods. And he would ask philosophical questions of us. And it was not just straight rote memory. Our mathematics was superb. Our lab work was great. Mrs. Senior was our biology teacher, and she taught us about the facts of life, and everybody giggled. We'd also dissected animals and things like this. Her hair was stringy. She was sloppily dressed. She taught us everything. Parents were not happy with her. She just didn't seem like what teachers should be like. But she was very good. And I would say she would be one of my favorite teachers. We never got along personally. The relationship between us was not any different than any other student, but I admired her. And in high school, as I started being interested in cultural activities, to some extent, the first brushing with them, and that was because of the teachers. I think my first cultural interest was music. Although I didn't play an instrument, nevertheless, I enjoyed our music teacher very much. She didn't enjoy me as much as I enjoyed her because my middle name is Dead Tone. But that was the first thing. I think that was the first experience. I'm not sure it's culture, but as you get older, and your juices change, we got interested in music. Slow, romantic, cheek-to-cheek music, and of course, then there was the jitterbug and the rock and roll, a bit of that. So while I was not good at singing and played no musical instrument, I've been a good dancer, and I enjoy it. So that was a cultural activity that we were taught to dance, waltzes and the like. June Delight's dancing class. She was not a teacher, but operated independently. We all went to the class. Owen Greenan and Mike Monahan and I started a newspaper in the 6th grade. It was called The Scoop. Mrs. Patrick, who was the teacher of the 6th grade, helped us start this newspaper, but it was for class consumption only. And then she suggested that we make more copies of it. It wasn't easy to do with this hectograph, this transfer jelly stuff, but we decided to do that, and we decided to charge for it. We called the newspaper The Scoop. And we finally got a mimeograph. All the typing was done by Mike Monahan's mother, Bruce Monahan, in the Monahan garage. And we got a mimeograph from Spencer's, $25, paid $5 a month, got that. And we published a lot of copies. And at the time we had the newspaper, there were 3 newspapers in town: the Pine Cone, the Gazette, the Symbol, and if you add us, a 4th newspaper, the Scoop. And those papers sold for 5 cents a copy. Our newspaper was 3 cents a copy because that's the same amount as the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune charged. So whatever they charged, that was our price. As you know, Pearl Harbor was on a Sunday. So the next day we felt that we had to put out a special edition of the newspaper. And so we all again reported to Mrs. Monahan's garage. And then we gleaned from the Monterey Peninsula Herald, which put out several editions that day, the most extraordinary stories, which weren't true, like the Japanese paratrooping in Denver, or something like that. That was in our newspaper. We did some block print type of things, the snowmen and Santa Claus and so on, with Christmas edition. We got several colors in the newspaper. We advertised in it. Local merchants were interested in our advertising. Was cheap, and the paper was small enough that people read every bit of it. Well, it had as much circulation as the Gazette, and that the big newspaper was the Pine Cone. And then, of course, the Pine Cone and the symbol of the Pine Cone merged with the symbol, and later on. But as I say, there were 3 newspapers in us. And it grew from 3 to about 15 of us. And the more we had, the more news we got. And some of the news was listening to parents speak, and there was a lot of stuff. It was the scoop, it really was at times. When you came down the Carmel Hill and hit the flat, which is Junipero, on the northeast corner, where there is a motel now, was a stable, Hodges Stables, with horses. And it was there for some years, and later moved down to the Mission Ranch, where the Mission Ranch tennis courts are. But there it was. And after it moved down, the barn was still there, and it was used as sort of a carnival roadshow type of thing. They would get automobiles from the crime cars, gang cars, type of sort of thing that would be, and they had sirens blowing and everything, and they simulated what was happening in Chicago at that time. And up the street from that, 2 blocks up the street, was Betty Green's stable. And that was not covered. There was a horse paddock, and they had the horses tethered there, and that was quite a popular stables. And she conducted a lot of rides, tours, and also one could take a horse and do what they wanted to do. That wasn't too far in the mid-30s, it wasn't too far from the horse age. They were still plowing with horses, some places. And so the stable was accepted as where the Carmel Plaza was a movie theater, typical old-fashioned movie theater with a kiosk where the cashier was. Then you'd go around the sides and go in the theater. And of course, we went to the theater. We went to the Saturday cowboy movies and stuff like that, movies and shorts and cartoons that were involved every Saturday practically. And on Mission, across from the theater, and still on the south side of Ocean Avenue, was the Carmel Post Office at that time. That would be Mission and Ocean Avenue, the southwest portion. And across the street from that was the Carmel Dairy. And that, of course, had a soda fountain. And that's where we all used to get our hamburgers and milkshakes, which that was our main diet. And the hamburgers and the milkshake, it cost a total of 25 cents. So, and sometimes we would spend the 25 cents on banana splits. 3 pieces of ice cream, each one had a different sauce on it. You know how they are, and then you have whipped cream on top of that, you have chopped nuts, and then on top of that you have cherries. Then on the corner of San Carlos and Ocean, on the northwest corner, was Kip's grocery store. Now, Kip's was a grocery store that had sort of like the New York West and East Side stores with crates of fruit and vegetables outside on the display. And that's where everybody shopped. That's where there was Nielsen's, that was in some other location, but that was pretty expensive. And so Kip's was the place. And hanging around Kip's was the village dog. They always had a dog. And some of the more graphic designs of Carmel will show the different dogs, and each one had a name, and he has it on there. They were all yellow and something like this. They were mongrels, but the dog was everybody's friend, and we were the dog's everybody was the dog's master. Yeah. Going down further, there was a Carmel library, of course, and then basically the town stopped, which incidentally I think is one of the saviors of Carmel. What happened is you don't have any sort of gas stations and fast food stores and everything leading into the community. The commercial area stops, with some exceptions. And so that was there. Right now where the city hall is was the Episcopalian church. That's why the vaulted ceilings. Yeah, Village Hardware was on the north side of Ocean, between San Carlos and Dolores, I believe. And that was the old-fashioned hardware store. And they had shelves going up to the ceiling, and a ladder that you could climb. And that was a hardware store where you'd come in and say, I'd like 3 screws. And you would show them with your thumb and finger how big the screw was, and they'd go up and get it. And then you'd come down, and you said, is this it? And you said, no. Up the ladder you'd go again. And and it wasn't, nothing was packaged. And that was quite a store. And then was finally bought by the Neals, and then it finally burned. Carmel Drugstore. That's always been there. That's one of the, I think it could be, although you may find some other, I think it's the longest consisting business in Carmel. Certainly not the same owners, of course, but it's still the store. That's where one got their prescriptions, still do, people. Buy the newspaper in the front, cosmetics. Stanford, they had a drugstore on the corner of Ocean and Dolores, the southwest portion. That was Stanford. A portion of Little Napoli restaurant was El Fumador. And in the front, as I say, it was a tobacco shop. And they cooked hamburgers in the front, and in the back, we never went back there because it was dark, and they had a light that sort of made a conical glow over some tables, and they were playing cards. And they seemed like sort of strange, dark people, that we did. But anyway, we were interested in the first part. And that building incidentally now is the El Paseo building, which consists of that store and and on the corner, and it's on, and that I'm half owner of the building, and we bought the building in 1970, and for a price that I can't tell you now, and you know, the rents has been really sensational. But anyway, and on the corner of going back to the El Paseo building, or Fumador, was Cooksley's restaurant. And when we went there sometimes at lunch, because it was not too far from Sunset. And at that time, even though I was in the 7th grade, I thought sometime I'd like to buy the building. And indeed, many years later, we did. I did. Well, the impact of the Depression. Well, we were young at that time. Depression lasted until really the beginning of World War II. And as I say, my parents, and most of our parents, protected us from it. Our needs were simple, and the food was on the table. And whether my father or mother were worried about business or not, they never passed that concern on to us. So it really didn't affect us. It affected the merchants and so on, but you know, after all, we're only 8, 9, 10 years old. And we weren't, and it wasn't in an area where, like the Dust Bowl, where people were starving. The school was aware of the Depression. And I can recall a lady who addressed us, and she was a nutritionist. And she was describing the making of cereals. You could buy it packaged, and it would cost so much. And if it were half finished, it would cost a bit less. And if you started with a grain, it would cost even less. And we as kids said, why do we care about that? The war did have an impact on all of us, and we were aware of it no matter at what age. As I had mentioned, we published The Scoop and had our special edition. Before that, there were socials and picnics, benefit for the Bundles for Britain. During the war, because we were on the West Coast, and you know, the Japanese did fire a couple of shells down in Santa Barbara, I believe. We were concerned about the Japanese, and we all had plywood on our windows. There was a gas ration, of course, and lights were such that you would have a exposure of about the size of a Band-Aid for your lights. They weren't for the purpose of seeing, but to avoid other cars, basically. There were canned goods that were rationed. We were aware of that. My father went, he was not in the service, and so, but he went to Yankee Point to observe aircraft, foreign aircraft as they came in. Well, when they get as far as Yankee Point, I'm not sure you could do much about them. But it was a good place to go and play pinochle with his group. And that was one impact. The other was, there was surprisingly little impact as far as journalism was concerned, except for the Monterey Peninsula Herald. The 3 newspapers in Carmel at that particular time. I think it became two at that time, said nothing about the war. Poetry, local advertising, social events, and never one thing about the war. Except you knew about the war because social events, there would be Colonel and Mrs. So-and-so, and Admiral and so-and-so. So if you put that together, you would know of a military presence. And there were other observation points. The 7th hole, which goes out to the point in Pebble Beach, there was an observation post there, right where the golf course is. And later on, during the latter part of the war, I was a service station attendant, and they wanted to talk to me about how things are going at Carmel so that I would squeeze a little more gas, you know, in the tank. My impression of the military presence on the Del Monte on the Pebble Beach golf course, the sixth hole and so on, was an observation post. There may have been guns there. I don't know. If they were certainly light in caliber. During the war, we did fear impending invasion. And that's why we had plywood over over our windows, so that, you know, if there were bombing or artillery shells or something like that, that would take care of it. These observation posts that we had were not only for airplanes, but to see if Japanese warships would be there. We did have the fear of that, particularly in the early part of the war, when we didn't have a fleet. That would be 42, perhaps. As far as annual activities, there was the Kite Festival. This would not be annual activities, but this was a constant activity. It was the Abalone League. The Abalone League consisted of townspeople who played softball, and it was mixed. There were women on it, just as many as men. The woman always was at first base, and it was played in a field that's basically the junction of Highway 1 and Carpenter. Up there, there was a field, and that was an activity that was interesting. The Bohemians had their abalone fests and all of that, but I know more about that by reading than experiencing. Well, so far as the origin of the Kite Festival is concerned, I'm not sure, because it was organized before I became aware of it. But as I say, the Kite Festival was on Hatton Fields, as it was called, a bare piece of property elevated across from the high school. Everybody made a kite in shop, which we were all required to take, and it was only for boys. The girls took home economics. But surprisingly enough, a lot of the kites were by the ladies, young girls, even as old as even in 2nd and 3rd grade. And we had different classes. How high the kite flew, how fast you could get a kite up, and what were the prettiest colors. as I said, I qualified for none of them because I was still running around with the kite dragging behind me. There were judges, male judges. There's some pictures of them with old +4s, and in garb that you could tell was in 1937. And of course we were snotty-nosed little kids, and then we have pictures of that too. And there's some. I have a very interesting Carmel, Monterey Herald, showing the winners of one of the festivals, showing who the people are, and I'm in it, and it's in the trunk of my car. You will want to see it. Halloween at that time was still trick and treat, but it was for us naughty boys. We soaped windows. We turned over garbage cans. We made a hellion. We were hellions, and made hell for the shopkeepers. We rolled pumpkins down Ocean Avenue, and you know, at the top, if you start there, that pumpkin gets real speed. And of course would smash eventually when it hit something. So there was a lot of cleanup to do. And the parents didn't take us around. I'm 12, 13 years old, and a little mean like all the rest of them. So it wasn't a pretty Halloween. Now, so far as Christmas was concerned, as far activities, there may have been, but we were so immersed in our own family and our own Christmas tree and our own electric train that went around the Christmas tree that I wasn't aware of anything else. And I was aware of receiving presents but not giving them. People talk about the cultural activities in Carmel. I was too young. I knew I knew some of the artisans. Francis Whitaker, who was, as we know, a blacksmith and did ornamental ironwork and other things, and did other things, you know, appropriate to his craft. We knew he did good work. I knew of a Weston who was very good with making furniture, designing and fabricating items of furniture. I knew of an Erica Frank who did tile work, and that was well done. I knew of the existence of Robinson Jeffers, and he had a cypress maze that was adjacent to his property, that was his. And we ran through the cypress maze and he chased us out. But we didn't know that he was really an author. My parents were not interested in the arts. As a consequence, I am now. I'm very seriously interested, but they were not. So as a consequence, we didn't have any friends that were in the art community. After graduating from high school, I went to Stanford University and was there for 6 years. 3 years were undergraduate, and then they had then I went into law school. And they had a program. Generally the undergraduate was 4 years, and then followed by 3 years of college. But I was able to get into an accelerated program where my last year of undergraduate was my first year of college, the first year of law school. And I wanted to do that because the Korean War was on, and I wanted to get my education completed before I was pulled into the service. And what happened is, for me personally, I only had one day in the service. My military experience consisted of one day. I was in ROTC. God knows why I joined it. And after you've completed 2 years, you've made a contract with the government for the remaining 2 years of ROTC, if you choose to take it, that you will go into the military service as a second lieutenant. And so now I've completed 1 year of law school, which is the 4th year of undergraduate, which is finally terminated my ROTC experience and was supposed to go in. And I said, well, I don't mind going into the military, but I want to finish law school. They said, tell you what we'll do. We'll give you a delay en route. We'll let you go from Palo Alto, California, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and we'll let you have a year in getting there. Well, that got me through the 2nd year. Now the 3rd year came up. And I said, what about this delay en route? And they said, we never heard of it, you know. So anyway, they took me in. And what happened is, on the physical, I had a heart murmur. Now, I had been doing a lot of athletics, and no one ever found the heart murmur again. But they found it and rejected me, and I was 1 day in the service. I completed law school, and I was able to complete my plan, and instead of being interrupted. The Korean War was going on at that time, and basically second lieutenants in the military, in the artillery, which I was a branch of, were forward observers, not a good thing to be. And we lost classmates. So far as the highlights of Stanford were concerned, I think I enjoyed my law school experiences more than any other. The reason is the law school was small, still is. And it was hard work. And I had such a good high school education that I had no trouble with the college one, undergraduate one, and it was a little boring because of the intense education I had at Sunset Grammar School and Carmel High School. What happened, though, is because of my football, more or less, prowess, they expected me, Stanford did too, to play football there. And Chuck Taylor was the coach at the time, and so I arrived, and I talked to him, and in meeting with me, he said, Dewar, why didn't you grow? So that never happened. And then I did play some water polo, but I was not great at that either, although I was a good swimmer. Again, my arms were too short, and when you're reaching for the ball, well, somebody else gets there first. As far as the school is concerned, no, it wasn't challenging, but of course, you know, there was times when I didn't study, and times when we got into drinking and things like this because we were freed of parental restraint. And but after that haze went away, I was married too by the time I got to law school. Well, my marriage career consists of 2 phases. One, I was married for 10 years to my high school sweetheart, and we have 1 child, and that's my only child by that marriage. I was married for 50 plus years to my second wife. That was Suzanne. And no children by that marriage. In fact, matter of fact, it was more than 50 years, maybe 52. So 10 plus 52 means I was married in the sandbox, you know. As I say, with my first wife, we met because we were high school sweethearts. Second wife is we both were on the board of the Monterey Museum of Art when it was in Carmel and before it moved to Monterey. And of course, we saw each other in board meetings. And she wore a particularly lovely orange knit suit, and I fell in love. I was married for 50 plus years to my second wife. That was Suzanne. And no children by that marriage. In fact, matter of fact, it was more than 50 years, maybe 52. So 10 plus 52 means I was married in the sandbox, you know. Sue was a dynamo. She was a very capable artist. She was not afraid of anything. She would go up to whoever it was and get engaged. Sue and I met when we were on the board of the Carmel, the Monterey Museum of Art, but she was Girl Scouts. She was on the board there. Legal Services for Seniors. Chartwell School, which is for the dyslexic. And she was also, surprisingly enough, the chairperson of the Boy Scouts for Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito. And, you know, a lady. Now, this is on board. This is not going camping with them, but she was involved in that. And so she was involved in a lot of them. She was interested in social activities, and she was clever with them, too. Not only was she an artist, but I called her Cecil B. Sue because the events she would put on were rather spectacular. I'll give you an example of one. When I'm 70, I know there's going to be a party for me, but I'm not sure what it's going to be. And I thought we were going to go to the Works house and have dinner. I arrived there. There were no cars there. I knocked on the door, and all the giggling. And when I got in, I found 70 women and myself. That's the kind of event she would do. When we have parties, everybody had to bring a balloon. And so we had all the balloons going around like this. I mean, it was incredible. She was good at that. She was on the, she was the president of the California Association of Symphony Orchestras. She did advocacy for the arts in Sacramento. She was responsible for our state senator and our state assemblyman to recognize Gus Areola as by both houses of the legislature. We went up there, marched down the aisle, and they gave him a big badge and stuff like this. But She was the one who enabled it. Yeah. So there was a lot of that. I was involved in certain activities too, but not to the extent that she was. My son is my favorite. He's incredible in many ways. He's talented and cares. He has a family. He and his wife Kathy have 2 grandchildren. And one of the grandchildren has 2 children, which is one of my great-grandchildren, ages 7 and 3. And also Whitney is pregnant and is expecting momentarily. And we know it's a boy. So we'll have 3 years separation and 4 years separation, which is very nice. They all live in the Half Moon Bay area. And indeed, since my birthday was on August 28th, I was up there the other day, and my great-granddaughter Whitney, birthday is on the 29th of August, and I'm on the 28th, so we shared time together. But anyway, so far as my son is concerned, we are very close, very close. He comes out down here quite often. He comes to see his mother too, which is by the former marriage. When I was raising my son, a lot of that had to do with times where my wife and I were divorced or separated. So a lot of the time was spent, but the visitation was very free. They did a lot of, she married again, and they did a lot of traveling, so consequently I would have the child, Scott, for a month or like things like this, and we played sports together. I can't describe any particular activity that causes me to remember more fondly than any other, because basically every time I'm with him, I feel happy. When I graduated from law school, I worked in San Francisco for a firm on Montgomery Street. And it was quite a change for me, because in grammar school, high school, and even college, we wore Levi's and T-shirts. And working in San Francisco at that time, women wore heels and white gloves and went shopping. And men wore 3-piece suits with hats. And that was a change for me. And I worked in San Francisco for several years. But at that time, the law community was closed. And you basically worked, now a Stanford graduate, when he gets out, gets $100,000 a year as an advisor, and he doesn't know what he's doing, but you pay him that. Well, we were getting, I would say, $350, $400 a month. And the reason was because it was an internship, like you have with physicians. They didn't let you do anything until you were in the firm for several years. There might have been exceptions, but certainly that didn't apply to me. And so I was married to my first wife then, and we were pregnant, and we lived on North Beach, and that's an experience. That we were there when the City Lights bookstore was going, and the Beatniks, and we were right in the middle of it. But when my wife became pregnant, we would have to go out in the avenues, which was another area, foggy. All the houses looked the same. So we decided to come back to Carmel, where I was from. Another reason is that you could not you could not advance in the firm until you were there for many years, and the benefits might be bestowed on your grandchild if he worked there. When I moved back to the Monterey Peninsula, it was a small town practice. A lot of it was hand-holding type of event. If one was hanging up the laundry, the neighbor was doing some rototilling. You know, I mean, just stuff. And a lot of it had to do with quelling people's emotions and saying, you know, you don't want to do this. My practice consisted of real estate work too, because as I said, my father had a title company, and I worked in the title company during the summer when I was in high school, and I was aware of real property. And as I said, the Monterey Peninsula was building out. And so I did a lot of the work in the subdivisions. The Carmel Knolls, Mission Fields, Monte Vista, Skyline Forest, all of those built out. And indeed, we are built out now. And it's Salinas where the growth is. Just no more land here that we want to do anything with. So my practice switched a little bit from that and into some estate planning. I did domestic work until I reached the age of 45, when I gave myself a birthday present and decided not to do any more divorces. So when I did when I got involved with estate planning, I found out they were just as contentious. Because when the titular head of the family dies, all the animosities among the siblings get involved. And before you know it, that was terrible too. And so I had a lot of litigation in that area. I did litigate, but it was only in the areas that I was acquainted with. Nothing to do with personal injury or that kind of thing. And a lot of us, small town. So I said I practiced law for 59 and a half years. And I regret that I'm not practicing now. I enjoyed it. Returning to the Monterey Peninsula, after my San Francisco experience, I lived with my then wife, and the child was growing up, and we lived just up the Carmel Valley, about 2 or 3 miles. We built a house for $85,000 and a lot for $3,000. And the reason why the lot cost $3,000, it was an acre. And Rancheria Vista, I think, is the name of the subdivision. And then eventually we, as I say, got divorced. I found myself then with my wife, then Suzanne. And we lived together for a year before we got married, which was unusual at that particular time. This is 50 years ago. And then, of course, we got married, and we lived in Pebble Beach. And I've lived there ever since. Sold the house recently after my wife passed away last year. And now at the retirement community that is in Monterey, Park Lane.
How had
the Carmel changed in many respects on returning, and it changed somewhat before that. But mind you, with the changes that occurred after I left for college, I would come back in the summertime sometimes, and then also too, I was married and we lived on North Beach, almost on Telegraph Hill. It was wonderful. And so I didn't see those changes as much until I moved back here after working in San Francisco. Then I saw some major changes, which had occurred a lot of them in the meantime while I was away. The theater, where the shopping center is, where the Carmel Plaza is, was no longer there. The plaza was there. Well, no, the plaza wasn't there. There were several shops there, and one of them was called Brazilian Interiors. When my wife, Suzanne, and I went on our honeymoon, we went to Brazil. We had taken an excursion to Europe the year before, and we knew a fellow by the name of John Zero, and he suggested, you ought to look at the furniture. So this was contemporary Brazilian furniture, somewhat like Danish, but not quite. Made out of Brazilian rosewood and leather and everything, high design furniture. And we decided to open a shop in Carmel. It's called Brazilian Interiors. And we maintained that during the era when the Carmel Plaza was in transition and starting to build. And we had our shop right there in downtown Carmel. And the designer of the furniture was a fellow by the name of Sergio Rodriguez, and did the interior palace and other things in Brasilia. I used to go down there quite frequently, learn Portuguese to some extent, most of which is gone now. And the furniture was such that it was also in Architectural Digest. It was wonderful. It's a little ahead of its time. Now the pieces by Sergio Rodriguez are extraordinarily valuable because his name became important. But Carmel was not the place for that either. We were more woodsy, and this was slick. And but it worked. But we had a lot of fun in Brazil. We samba'd. We went to Carnival. It was a wonderful time in my life. Brazil now I wouldn't go to. It's crime-ridden. There's nothing. But we could go to Brazil and leave our gear on Ipanema Beach, go swimming, and it would still be there when we returned. You don't want to do that now. We were going to take our honeymoon, and since we had been to Europe the year before, we decided to go someplace else, South America. And that's where I said this. We met this fellow. We knew this fellow who was formerly at the language school and was involved with the government agency, some government agency, and suggested we go there. And he brought over a chair, a sample, because he was interested in the furniture. And he brought over a chair that is a very famous chair. So it's rosewood and leather, and it's slung on straps, and it's quite a nice chair. And that intrigued us. So he said, and so we're thinking of where to go. And so we were sitting around having martinis, and he said, well, why don't we go to Brazil? And Sue said, I don't know, I can't go this week. I've got to have my hair done. And I said, I've got a Rotary meeting. And so we finally got together, sobered up a little bit, and off we went. There we met John Zerrill's friends, who took us around everywhere, and got involved in all these things. John Zerrill went too sometimes, and he was very glib, and they thought that we were rich Americans who were going to do some importing. And as a consequence, we met all the important people in Brazil. We met Kubitschek, who was the president at the time, and with a lot of other things. We didn't dine with him, but we got around on John's BS. Some people mourn what's happened to Carmel. There are several ways to approach it. One is physically, and one is lifestyle, emotionally. Let's talk about safety. Nobody locked their doors. You could go into anybody's house, and the only way, when you announce your presence, you would move in, go in a couple of feet in the entry hall or the living room and say, "Here I am," and that was it. Another safety change is the police force. It must have 20 in the police force now. Well, early on, I only recall 3. And what the police did was tell your parents. And your parents were responsible for your discipline and your manners. That's a big change. Because now, if you do some of these errant things, you'll have psychological tests, you will have a court hearing, you will have all of this kind of stuff. And we didn't have that at the time, and that's a substantial change. Also, in change, it was how parents or the adult community approached the children. They almost universally cared. And the businesses, probably because of the Depression, and because there wasn't any underlying receipt of money, money was not a pursuit, because you didn't have any. And I can recall that, for instance, when we had our senior prom, it was free, and it was at the beach club, the beach and tennis club in Pebble Beach. And now, of course, to have that same event would cost you $15,000, and there it was free. And they parked our cars and did everything. It was wonderful. I spent a lot of time at the beach club, swimming. But anyway, going back to parents, going back to the changes. So, and there was, and another way, of course, that I knew that the adult community seriously enjoyed children, and they were and we met a lot of them, of course, when we were selling newspapers to them. One of the changes is the elimination of so many gas stations. On the corner of San Carlos and 7th, there was a gas station on each corner. If you went north to Ocean Avenue, there was another big gas station, which was the Carmel Garage. If you went a little further north, probably on 6th Street, was another one, Carl and Chan. So now I'm naming 6 gas stations in the area. And of course that changed. Carmel became the property became too valuable for that, and you put in these other shops. The houses have changed somewhat. Many of them were single wall construction. You either had your conduit inside or you had your conduit outside. And the lots were 40 by 100. You needed 2 lots. And some of the houses, though, were only on one, which really, made them very small. And they were basically board and bat and very simple. Comfortable, but simple. Now, of course, the modern theme is to have as big a place as possible. And I don't like that either in Carmel or anyplace else. As far as merchants are concerned, merchandise is more T-shirts and souvenirs than it was during the war and before it. The fine shops have mostly gone, and the fine shops that are there are over the top in price. It hasn't hurt my interest in the El Paseo building, but I'm not particularly fond of it. The town is more crowded than it used to be too. This is a difference. After the war, when the European community started reviving, we got a lot of tourists there. And for a while, as we know, the Japanese were on top with their automobile industry and everything else, and they were there. And the Bay Area prospered more, and consequently, the Carmel became a weekend destination. And with all that, we had a change in the shops because the landlords charged so much that you would have to circulate your merchandise or roll it over faster. You couldn't keep it. The other thing, though, is the city limits never changed, and the beach never changed. Well, there's absentee ownership here now, and I'm not in favor of it. One of the reasons is that those who have it are not voters here. They don't have any control. And secondly, many of the absentee owners have money and have changed the modest Carmel attractive house into somewhat of a nightmare of a mansion. Not all. Now, I'm going to cough again. However, when I walk Carmel, particularly in the south part of it, or any place else, every house looks almost different. Each one has their own conception of beauty. And the variety is incredible. You go to San Francisco, and you see out there and all these ticky-tacky places that are exactly the same. But each one in Carmel is a little different. You will find 4 or 5 different styles on a given block. And I think that still exists. In a grander scale, but the theme is the theme is there, or the emotion is there, whatever you might call it. And that's good. As far as impact of you were saying about non-residency. except for their destroying the houses, the modest houses, and modestly attractive houses, modest and attractive houses, and putting up the mansions, and voting. I wouldn't say that there's much of an impact. That's plenty. Carmel, like Pacific Grove and other small towns, has their factions. Since I have an important commercial building in Carmel, they're always trying to get me to go one way or another on these things, particularly the merchants. And my wife suggested we never move back to Carmel because I'd get involved in Carmel politics. So I stayed away from that. And the politics in Carmel are there. The commercial interests and the residential interests compete, but that's true everywhere. That's true, particularly in smaller towns. And it's small enough, too, that we know, or think we know, our politicians, and that means either we like them or we don't like them. If you're removed somewhat, and you're in Washington, D.C., and send a letter to your constituency every once in a while, they don't know as much about you. But man, there's these council meetings. And people sit here at the council chambers without anything on the agenda for recreational purposes. And there is the contention, but I think that's true of any small town. I read about Pacific Grove, I read about Seaside, and there's always contention. I've been on several boards that have to do with, well, land use advisory in Pebble Beach, and we have contentions in the Del Monte Forest too. So I don't think it's any more contentious than any other community. If someone were to ask me the question of what's my Carmel, I would say, when would I have liked to have been born? And my answer is 1929, when I was born. Because we moved to Carmel during my real, let's say, awareness period. We lived in Salinas when I was not so much so. And Carmel has always meant a happy place to me. I have a commercial business here. I am fond of the downtown, even though it's a little more commercial than I would like it. There's a beach not too far away. There's the Del Monte Forest, which I live in now. I like the environment. I like the weather, with the exception of, for many years, 3 months of the year at least were shrouded in fog. Another thing about Carmel is I've enjoyed the residents in two respects. One is that they were always good to me. And secondly, they were varied in personalities. There was a lot of difference between one and another. There wasn't a cookie-cutter population. And that divergency was interesting to me. As I said, I was too young in many cases to realize that they were artists. I didn't even know what that meant. But I sure knew that they were different from one another.